leadership for me lost integrity for many people, that they started to bully and targets were thrown out with no possibility of targets being met, people being put under tremendous strain. And as a result, in the UK, over half the prescriptions that are written are for antidepressants. When you start to unpick that, one of the biggest reasons for that is work. There are other reasons, but a consistent reason that is actually identified is stress at work. In 2019, which is the last time when there were figures available without a pandemic or anything like that, 70 billion pounds was lost because of days off due to stress in the UK alone. 140 billion pounds was lost from what they call presenteeism, where people are present, they're physically present, but they're not firing on all cylinders. It is my belief that starts and finishes with the quality of leadership.
Hello and welcome to the Eternal Optimist podcast. I'm Matt Drinkon, your host and an Eternal Optimist. And what is that eternal optimism? Seeing things through a positive lens. And then the eternal part, everything that comes at you, it's an opportunity to learn. It's as simple as that. Everything that flows through this filter, this lens that we all have, called our brain, called our senses, everything that comes through is something that we might use to our advantage to serve the world in some way. That's eternal optimism. Or as Simon Sinek might put it, it's the infinite game. Playing long-term games with long-term people so we can have a long-term impact on humanity. Now, as we get started today, I want to encourage you to rate and review this show on Apple, on Spotify. It will take you 2 or 3 minutes, and that will mean the world to me. Thank you so much for doing that in advance. You are much appreciated, our audience. Thank you. I'm also open to any feedback. Feel free to connect with me on any of our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, at Eternal Optimist Podcast account. There's also a live stream every morning, Monday through Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern. Feel free to check that out if you want a dose of energy and optimism and a couple key learning lessons that might serve you and prompt you in your day. Now, today's episode, incredibly important. When I met Miss Gina Gardiner on the other side of the pond from the UK, my first thought at the conclusion of our conversation was, man, I just met the female version of me plus a few years. She's amazing. She has such an amazing energy. And when you hear her story, your jaw will drop. Here are a couple things we talk about today. Well, we're gonna go deep right away. And you'll find out if you Google Gina that she has incredible influence and reach, right? Well, as you do this, here's one story that might get you on the edge of your seat. She talks about how at the age of 28, how she was skiing in Switzerland. She went down a black diamond run. That's one of the most complicated and challenging ski runs you can go down a mountain. She went down a black diamond run over a mogul, and she hit on that mogul something that caused her to land, to fall over 100 feet and have a serious spinal injury, which left her disabled, and she became paralyzed down one side. Shortly thereafter, the principal at the school that she worked died. And as a result of that, she took over within the previous year. She'd become paralyzed down one side, and now the leader of the school passed away, and now she's having to, 1, learn how to walk again, 2, lead a staff and enable the staff to take action. And the theme today, and the theme of her life, is how we can see the challenges as a gift. And she shares her whole story. She talks about such things as how do we grow emerging leaders and how do we continue to grow senior leaders. We talk about the feeling, the burning feeling of when you have it inside you that you feel you can do more. What do you do? She talks about how she used the pandemic to write a couple more books, and now today she has over 30 publications. She talks about writing your own life story. She talks with such questions as what behaviors need to be in place for you to take action the way you want and achieve what you want. We go psychology, below the line, above the line. We talk about respect for our own people and our clients. We talk about what does excellence look like in any role and any team. What would you think would make a big difference to the way that we do things in our lives? Another question that she uses. Gina's amazing. She's got so much knowledge and so much great grace and empathy in her heart for the humanity of people. Heck, at the beginning or the end of this conversation, when we finish recording, Gina showed me a Zoom picture of around her house, and in the background were literally every room was full of relief supplies for the Ukraine effort, because she's big into peacekeeping and charity and helping people out. She talks about walking your walk, walking your talk, and how to go from thriving to surviving. This is an amazing conversation with my new friend, Miss Gina Gardiner. I hope that you check into it, you pay close attention, and you go follow her over on YouTube and all the rest of the places you can find her. She won't be hard to find. Gina Gardiner. Look forward to it. Here comes the conversation. Enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to the Eternal Optimist podcast, the show for optimists by optimists. This is the show for people who see the good in the world and want to make a positive difference in the lives of their families and communities. Each week, you'll hear inspiring stories that will get you thinking bigger and playing more offense in life. With your host and high-performance coach, Matt Drinkon.
And this is your host, Matt Drinkon, sharing that today's sponsor is a shout-out. It is a shout-out to our guest, Gina Gardiner's show on YouTube, Genuinely You with Gina Gardiner. Have you ever felt like you're in a place where you're not able to be completely authentic and be yourself, or you're not comfortable being yourself in a professional environment, so you hold back a little bit with your guard up? When you listen to Gina's show on YouTube and watch it, you get to see and experience the way it is to be completely authentic and transparent with everyone. And that is the way that Gina lives her life. That is the way that she has been living it for a number of years. And she talks about so many important, valuable topics, talks about your relationships, talks about your marriage, talks about how you conduct yourself as a leader in business, your own internal dialogue, how you might continue to learn and grow through self-study or doing it through mentors. Gina has a host of guests on her show with a host of important topics that are a compendium of personal growth and development. I encourage you and implore you, my friends, to check this out. Anything around beliefs, relationships, fulfillment with purpose, Gina is an expert, and she only interviews experts. So I invite you to check it out, Genuinely You with Gina Gardiner over on YouTube. Now, let's get back to the interview. I'd love to kick it off, Gina, and ask you, and you can use any time, a point in time you'd like. You can start right now, today in your life, or go back to childhood. But I'd love to kind of get to the bottom of what's something that you found challenging in your life, and let you take it from there.
I'll start then. I wasn't very happy at school. I didn't fit in. I always felt as if I was on the outside. And part of that was because I had changed schools several times because of my father's job. When I started teaching, and that was my first professional life, I found who I was. I was good at it. I loved it. And I was very lucky that I ended up at a school that was at a time when education was, as I see it, education. It was broad. We taught the children how to learn. It was fun, but the children still achieved well. And I was promoted very quickly. And so by the age of 28, I became the deputy principal of a large school. And I was appointed to be the catalyst for change. And so for the first 6 months, I worked with my principal, John Hughes, who was lovely, for us to strategically plan how we were going to move the school forward. And in the UK, in the February half term, we get a week's holiday. And I was a very keen skier. I was a proficient skier. But at those days, it was the fashion for skis to be as long as possible. And I had a new pair of skis for Christmas, and they were 10 centimetres longer than I was used to. So I spent most of the week wrapping that extra 10 centimetres around my neck and falling. I did a lot of bindings checks, falling.
Okay.
And on the Thursday, I had a really bad fall, and I split my brand new ski suit from thigh to the floor, and my earring went through my ear. And I said to the people that I was skiing with, look, tomorrow I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to get myself together. We were in St Anton, which is quite a difficult skiing area because the pistes are quite narrow and they're steep. So it's said that all of the grades on the slopes would be a grade higher anywhere else you went. So I said, leave me alone and and they said, well, come and join us for lunch, which I did. We had a lovely lunch and it was a beautiful day. The sun was shining, one of those magnificent days when, everything's sparkling and it's just wonderful. And so he said, yeah, I'll come with you. So off we went on the chairlift, and I got off the lift and I just followed them. We were skied probably for a couple of miles. And then they went round a corner and it was pretty evident that this wasn't where they're meant to be. Because instead of it being a really great red run, it was a black diamond run with moguls that were 6 foot tall.
I've heard of these. This is like the expert level stuff. Yeah.
This is beyond expert. Now, I've done black runs before several times, but nothing quite like this. Now, a mogul is where the weather has carved out the snow. And they can be anything like cobbles, just, a couple of inches tall. But these were 6 foot monsters. And the only way you could ski was to actually turn on the mogul and slide down to change direction. And I'd left a bit too late, about a third of the way down this run. And I ended up in powder snow. And it took me about 20 minutes to retrieve my ski and then get back to where the other members of the party were all sitting on a mogul, rather like an elf sitting on a mushroom. So I took my skis off and we were just talking. They were all smokers and were having a cigarette. I've never smoked. But we were just sitting there and suddenly the top of my mogul gave way. And I found myself falling. But there was nowhere to fall. And the last thing I remember was hearing a scream and then everything going black.
Oh.
I was told later that scream was me. And I came to between 150 and 200 feet down the mountain.
Wow.
And it took them a long time to ski down to me. The good thing about it is that with the 2 falls and the skiing that I'd done, that I was almost at the bottom of the run. And we were quite close to the hotel. And I was insistent that with their help, I would go back to the hotel. And the next day, we travelled home. My mum took one look at me and I was carted off to the local accident and emergency. And I was told that I'd got a bad concussion and that I'd trapped a nerve in my neck. Oof. So it took me 3 weeks to get back to school. So by this time, we're now talking about sort of middle March. And 5 weeks later, I went skiing as the deputy leader with the borough ski party with 156 children. Okay. And although I was still wearing a soft collar and I wasn't right, because we'd got a medic going with us, I was told that I could go. So this time we're skiing in Switzerland, in Morges. And as the week went on, so I became more like Quasimodo. And by the Friday night, we were due to travel home on the Saturday, I said to my colleagues, I've just got to go and lie down. And I went upstairs, and I don't know how I did it. I got onto the top bunk because this was not a very posh hotel, let me tell you. And within a few minutes, I discovered that I was paralysed down one side. Oh. There were children in the corridor. I didn't want to shout and frighten them. And so I had to wait until somebody came. And that I suspect it was only a very few minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. They arrived, all hell broke loose. I was carted off to hospital and a week later flown home, back to hospital. And I eventually got back to school by the end of, I suppose, the middle of June. And in the UK, we break for the summer around the 21st of July. And so I was sleeping and doing school, and I managed to get to the holiday. And I thought, if I get to the holiday, I've got 6 weeks. I can really concentrate on recovering. Okay. Got to the end of the school term. 8 days into the holiday, very early in the morning, I get a telephone call. On the other end of the telephone call, my principal's wife is hysterical. And when I could finally understand what she was saying, she had found John Hughes had died in his sleep. So far from it being a quiet, restful holiday, I had to let the rest of the staff know, let the parents know, the local authority know, help her plan the funeral and plan for September, because now I was acting principal. I served as acting principal for a term, and I was appointed to be the permanent principal in January. That's January 1984, and I was 29. Now I was the head of that school for 20 years, just over 20 years.
Okay.
And for the most part, I ran that school from a wheelchair. I had 2 failed back surgeries. I learned to walk twice as an adult, once while I was at school and once I left school. Now, there were some pretty dark times, but there was a huge gift in that. And the gift was I had to find a way of enabling my staff to take radical responsibility for themselves and a shared responsibility for the school, and to do that without standing behind people. Now, I'd like to think that I would have found this way of doing things if I hadn't had to. I'm honest enough to say that I'd probably have interfered far too much. It was highly successful. The school was on the 100 best schools in the country list twice. We were one of the first beacon schools. The school was highly successful, and we were commissioned by the government to go and help other schools to use the same principles. I worked for the DFES as an advisor. That's the government. I worked as a trainer facilitator for the National College and for the London Institute. I was an Ofsted inspector, not all at the same time, and all to bring a budget into school because our budget was so poor, and I wanted our special needs and our technology to both be cutting edge. I was working a 14, 15, 16-hour day because I did a lot of that work in my own time. And by 2004, my health was deteriorating. And so I was given pretty much an ultimatum by the consultant to say, if you carry on doing what you're doing, you'll be housebound. And I have to tell you, daytime television doesn't do it for me.
No. Okay.
So
okay.
I left in October 2004. 1984 was when I became the head. Sorry, I get my decades mixed up. In 2004, when I left school.
Okay.
So the next challenge is, what do I do now? Because my identity was so tied up with being a principal. I thought, I've got all of this experience, all of this expertise. What am I going to do now? So I don't know if you want me to go straight into the next challenge or whether I am very conscious that I've spoken a lot. So it's up to you.
Well, this was amazing. Just the resilience and the grit to come back from first, not one, multiple challenges that you've shared so far. First with the moguls, and then later with the paralysis. And then when you're getting better, your principal passes away 8 days into the holiday. And now before anything else, within July, August, September, within less than 60 days, you get to take over and run everything. And you're just recovering yourself. I mean, so many challenges, but the thing that really resonates with me the most so far, Gina, I love your story, and you have a beautiful way of telling it. I mean, I love your accent, but the gift in all these challenges. I heard you share that phrase, the gift in the challenges. It's like, I admire and respect that so much, that you are able to frame these really hard things were really the birthplace of, how you learn to delegate, develop, empower your staff, your team. I mean, you were forced to do certain things, and you did it because you saw the gift in all of these hardships. So I want to honor you for that. And I'd love to continue to come. Maybe that's the theme we come back to later. I love that part of it. And I'd love to continue on the story. What is the next story? Yeah.
So I'd had an internal spinal stimulator fitted, and it's like having an internal TENS machine. And I was very ill because they nicked the dura of the spine, so I was very poorly. And so it took me a little time to recover. And then I thought, what do I do now? So by this time, I've not only run my own school, but I've also worked with hundreds of other teachers and dozens of other schools and worked nationally for the government. And I thought, well, what do I do now? So at this time, I'm still wheelchair bound, having had a second failed back surgery. And so I thought, well, do you know what? I think that leadership is leadership. I don't think it matters what the context is. So I took myself off to do a research project across industries to look at two areas particularly. How did they grow emerging leaders? Because so often people are good salespeople or good technicians, and then they're given the job of leading other people, and they find it's like herding cats. Looked at that, and also then looked at the issues in terms of developing the most senior leaders, because there is such a difference between being the ultimate decision maker and being somebody who's perhaps one or two levels down the line. And of course, discovered it was exactly the same as it was in education. So I wrote my first two books. And between 2005, when I set up my first business, Gina Gardiner Associates, and early 2009, I used those two books as my calling card to mainly corporates, doing coaching and facilitation training all around the development, empowerment, and the development of leadership. I've always done life coaching. I've been a life coach even while I was a serving principal, and so did that, but also went into corporates. And then the last recession happened. And in 1 week, the whole of my year's contracts disappeared.
Wow.
Because the first thing that goes in most corporate budgets when there's a recession is training and development. So I thought, what do I do now? By this time, I was doing some visiting lecturing for Essex University Business School, and they would commission me to go out into companies, SMEs usually, under 200 staff, turnover of anything up to 10 million. And very often I would be commissioned to do some training. I'd get there and discover that actually they didn't need that training. They needed something else. And so would work with them. I was often invited back. And so I contacted some of those companies and said, how about I come and work on retainer? And until the pandemic, that was the model. And so I would work usually for something around 2 years. They were all much more profitable, better staff relationships, better staff retention, more productivity, more profitability within 10 months. And then they built on that. So even if they were successful before I worked with them, because of the work that we did about getting people to take radical responsibility for their own performance and a shared responsibility for delivering the vision, and getting leaders to take responsibility for doing the inner work on themselves so that they were authentic and they walked their talk and they dealt with their own emotional fallout before working with their staff. The staff and the leaders found that they had better work-life balance, that they had greater job satisfaction. But then the pandemic happened. Now, there's a parallel. So there's the pandemic and there's another story that runs alongside that. So just to finish the business one, the Gina Gardiner Associates, it just happened that the profile of businesses that I was working with at that time were all closed by the government. Just closed. Because they were either in hospitality or events or just happened. Had it happened a year before, the profile would have been different. So at a stroke, Gina Gardiner Associates was not operating the same way. Now,
Golly,
rewind
Gina,
a
this is the
bit
second
because
time. I mean, it happened in the first recession in 2009, and now COVID comes around, and the second time it happens again.
yeah,
You are truly resilient.
well, my mum used to call it bloody minded, and there is something about that you know that it's not how many times you get knocked down, is it? It's how many times you get back up.
Absolutely.
But between my leaving school and 2017 and 18, I had this burning feeling that I had to do more, that I was very effective working with individuals, teams, and whole organizations. But I saw a sea change in the quality of leadership after the recession 2008-9. And, talking to particularly life coaching clients who could either be the leader or dealing with a leader that was not leading effectively, and looking at the news and looking at the politicians and looking at what was going on, that leadership for me lost integrity for many people, that they started to bully and targets were thrown out with no possibility of targets being met, people being put under tremendous strain. And as a result, in the UK, over half the prescriptions that are written are for antidepressants. And when you start to unpick that, one of the biggest reasons for that is work. There are other reasons, but a consistent reason that is actually identified is stress at work. In 2019, which is the last time when there were figures available without a pandemic or anything like that, £70 billion was lost because of days off due to stress in the UK alone. £140 billion was lost from what they call presenteeism, where people are present, they're physically present, but they're not firing on all cylinders. And it is my belief that starts and finishes with the quality of leadership.
Okay.
And so I decided that I needed to do something on a bigger scale. I set up Genuinely You. So here comes the next challenge. I want to do something on a global scale. Okay? I've got no internet presence. I'm not very technical. I had a Facebook and a LinkedIn account, neither of which I used. I'd never videoed myself. I hadn't used any editing software or anything. And so my next challenge was, well, if I'm going to set this up, and my mission is to positively impact on over 1 million leaders in the next 3 years now, I had to find a way of doing that. So my challenge was, I'm not very technical. The computer knows when I'm stressed and behaves badly in absolute proportion to my level of stress. And so I had to start creating an internet presence. I'd written another couple of books in the meantime. I needed to do so. I used the pandemic to write a lot of books. I'd already 2 weeks before the pandemic, I had a long, a significant leadership program certified and accredited by the Continuous Professional Development Standards Office, and that was launched 2 weeks before the pandemic. 10-month holistic leadership program. And so what I've been doing is I've got lots of online programs. I've got 30 publications now, that ultimately I want to leave a living legacy, and we all leave a living legacy in every word we speak or not, how we speak it, every action we take or not, every thought has an energy, has a vibration, that we make a difference in how we turn up moment by moment. And so my mission is to help people lead their own lives. So you be the leader of your own life by taking radical responsibility. And when you do, nobody can make you unhappy or frustrated unless you choose to let them. You can't be a victim if you're being the leader of your own life. What you can be is the hero or heroine. And I liken it to writing your own life story. If you're going to write your life story, then at least write yourself a damn good part.
That's right. Okay. Gina, I appreciate everything you're
So
sharing so
the
far.
current,
Just again, we go back to another seemingly insurmountable challenge happened
yeah,
with, well, the pandemic, and you used the pandemic to write 2 more books. You had a certified program that
no,
started
no,
before the
not,
pandemic. Oh,
yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say, I wrote about 15 books in the pandemic.
Oh, pardon me, 15 books during the pandemic itself, up to 30 publications now. And your mission is to help people lead their own lives and to radically accept
And
responsibility.
to lead their own lives
Yes.
and to become leaders. And the
And to
other
become.
part of that is to work with leaders so they become the leader of leaders, that they aren't
Mm,
sheep, they're not lemmings. And part of that
mm,
is developing consciousness, is to learn how to listen to that inner voice, how to tune into their intuition, and to use that alongside data to be much more aware of how they turn up moment by moment, and to be authentic in everything they do. And one of the things that I think is a really easy model to take, if you think about your values, the values that are really, really important to you, okay,
okay.
and imagine that, well, the first thing is what behaviors need to be in place for those values to be met, both in
Mm-hmm.
the way you behave, but also the way people behave to you. So if you think about love, one client, was a couple I was working with, they were talking about the value of love. And I said, what behaviors do you need to experience in order to feel loved? And the woman said, I need him to buy me flowers. And he was incandescent. What do you mean, buy you flowers? I buy you flowers every Friday. And she said, no, you don't. You put flowers in the shopping trolley. You don't buy me flowers. You just put a bunch in the shopping trolley. And moreover, you usually look for the ones that are reduced. And he thought about it for a moment, or 2 or 3, and then said, you're right. There's no more thought goes into that than buying a tin of beans. And I
Yeah.
think that if you imagine a line where the behaviors, your values and the behaviors are above the line, the trick is to notice when you are approaching below the line where your behaviors are not in line with your values. And that's a model you can use with your children, with your partner, with your staff, where you agree what are the values and what are the behaviors that would operate above the line. What makes okay good? What makes good excellent? And that is something that's articulated, and the blueprint for that is shared. So everybody then knows, and you can say, do you know what? You're going below the line. That's not what we agreed was acceptable. And so it makes it
Hmm.
very easy then to orchestrate your building on where you are now in terms of your capacity to be even better.
Hmm. Hmm. So this operating above the line and below the line, how would I know if I'm living and operating, my behaviors are above the line or below the line according to my values, Gina? How would I learn that? Is that part of the
Well,
leadership
first of all,
development?
what are your values? Okay, so what are your values? And your values, and if you're a leader of a business or a company, what are your company values? They are often the same,
Okay.
but not necessarily. And what we do is we bandy about these big words: integrity, trust,
Mm-hmm.
respect. So let me give you an
Mm-hmm.
example with respect. I went into a company, and they behind in their foyer they had their values were all written great big letters, and right in the middle was respect for one another, respect for our clients.
Okay.
I hadn't been in there 5 minutes when I heard people gossiping about other people in the company and being rude about certain clients. Now, when I talked to the boss and we talked to, they had gone part of the way, they had identified the values, but they'd not identified the behaviors.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So then when at each meeting, they would take one of their values and say, what does that mean? What are the behaviors that underpin this particular value in the context of this company? And it has to be done by people everybody within the company or within the team. You can do it in a team, you can do it as a family. And you then create a model so everybody knows, it's written down, and it's talked about. It's not just done and put in a file. It becomes living and breathing. But it's really important that the senior leaders model those and are an excellent example of that. So it's no good talking about respect and then shouting at a member of staff in front of other people, or saying that respect is important and then, gossiping or moaning about someone if that's not respectful. Mm-hmm. And so it's the communication where these things are teased out and agreed. And it works at a whole range of levels. So I was working in a hotel. When I went to the hotel, they were £8 million in debt. The hotel was empty most of the time. Their reviews were terrible. And the 3 directors had just inherited the hotel from their father, and none of them had a background in hospitality. And just an example, there was a lot of things that we did, but the housekeeping was poor. So I worked with the leader of the housekeeping, and I helped her run a session where we looked at what does excellence look like when you're cleaning a bathroom? What does it look like when you're cleaning a bedroom? And the ladies, and they happen to all be ladies, sat and discussed, well, what's good enough and what's excellent? How would we define the difference? And so the model, the excellence model became, that's their standard. And so we also then set up a way of that being monitored. Now, but we set up a reward system rather than you do it wrong and we tell you off system. So they monitored, and it was the people didn't know when their rooms were going to be monitored. They were done in a way that, it wasn't Tuesday, it's my room today, I'll do it properly. And they collected merits. And at the end of the month, the person with the most merits got a free meal for them and their husband in the restaurant of the hotel. It cost very little for the hotel to give them a meal, but it was a way of saying, we've noticed that you're really working hard. Thank you. So can you see how you've got people with different standards? My standard of cleanliness and excellence in terms of cleanliness might not be the same as yours. But if you do it collectively, and then any new member of staff is taken in and it's shared with them, so it's perpetuated. And it can work in pretty well any business context. I've worked in such a range of businesses. But the important thing is that it's revisited, that it's part of day-to-day conversation. But if the leader doesn't model it, then you're on a hiding to nowhere.
Well, I appreciate your insights here and your expertise here in sharing how you've helped to turn this specific example with the hotel and speaking with the leader of housekeeping, how you got them to collaborate together to look at what excellence looks like in their behaviors, and then they created the standard. And I love the way that you bring that to them, and that's how we determine above or below the line, is they get to create what the behaviors look like when they're living up to or exceeding that standard or their values. I love that.
And where the line is. But just to let you know, the hotel, within 5 years, they were debt-free. They had refurbished the hotel, complete hotel. They had an 87% occupancy. There were people, it was buzzing with people for coffee, lunch, afternoon tea, dinner. They did specialist events, conferences, and so on. The hotel won awards. It was doing really well when I left.
Absolutely fantastic.
And
Well,
that was using
congratulations.
these same principles that I developed. Thank you. But the same principles I developed at school, exactly the same. Get people to see the vision, to share it, and to own it, and then to take radical responsibility for their part in delivering it. And you have success that's actually sustainable.
I go back to that thread of radical responsibility. I love the concept so much. I'm curious, when you come upon a leadership team, maybe it's a team of people, or maybe it's one leader above everyone who is resistant to accepting radical responsibility. And they might point to the other people and say that it's on them. And I'm curious how you might help get that person to come to see the folly of their ways, or come to be more self-aware when you find that challenged leader who thinks it's everyone else.
Let me give you another example then, because it's easier to tell you the story.
Yes.
So I'm working with a laboratory, and the owner works in the laboratory. When I start working with them, they're successful, but all of the staff are on piece rate. They work incredibly long hours, and there's quite a lot of dissension. And the starting point was, if only I could get the right staff, then I would have time to do my own work and I'd have a life. And when I went in and I started to watch and to listen, the reason that was going on is because nobody trusted themselves to be the arbiter of the standard of their work. It all went through him. And the reason that happened is because on a good day, he was very jovial and hail fellow, well met. But on a bad day, when he was stressed, he was grumpy and, would fly off the handle. And when we started talking about, it had to start with him and taking radical responsibility, and that he had to be consistent about doing it, he was resistant. And to start with, the resistance is that he would cancel appointments. And so I thought, what am I going to do with him? He obviously, on one hand, he says, I want a life, I want staff to be better, I want things to go well. On the other hand, it's the staff. If only he could get the right staff, it would all be all right. But by talking to him, and then I said, if you're brave enough, we'll have a staff meeting that I'll run, and we'll ask your staff to be prepared to say what would they think that would make a difference to what they were doing. And I facilitated that meeting. And I think he found it very painful because whilst, in fact, they were very nice about it, there were enough home truths in there. The fact that they didn't know from one day to the next how he was going to behave. That they were unclear about the standard, because on one day a standard would be okay and on another day it wouldn't. But there were lots of other things. So, for example, not only was he like that with the staff, but the dentist, it was a dental lab, they had terms and conditions, but none of the dentists played ball with the terms and conditions. And so their time was taken up because they wouldn't get things the prescriptions, because they made implants and crowns. So a lot of time was taken up because there was no consistency. So started with the staff in terms of what could we easily do with them that would make a difference to their life. And at the same time, I started to work completely separately with the business owner. And, once you recognize you're the common denominator, you take yourself into every moment of every day, then, if you can't change other people, but you can change you. So let's change a few things and let's see if it works. And we looked particularly at, okay, let's look at your dentists that you work with. And we got him and the staff to grade them A, B, or C. A is they
Yeah.
always do what they are supposed to. They pay on time. Their prescriptions are perfect. Great. And then we looked at those who sometimes aren't very good and those that were awful. And take up, the 80-20 rule. 80% of your time is taken up with 20%. And I made a radical suggestion. I said, okay, we reissue your terms and conditions and tighten them up. And we say that from a month's time, you've got a month to get your act together. We'll give you a month and we'll work with you. But if you continue not to fulfill the terms and conditions, we're really sorry, we won't provide you with the service anymore. The staff were over the moon because they were so frustrated by that. And some of the dentists complied. They went out and trained those dentists initially, and they sacked quite a few dentists, but suddenly found they had a lot more time to go and recruit new dentists, and they got a great reputation. I mean, their work was great. But within 10 months, one of the things that I'd suggested and that the leader did, quite reluctantly, I have to say, was to stop them being on piecework and put them on a salary. Within 18 months, they were working probably a third less hours, but were much more productive. He was much more even. He had a life. Everybody had a life. They became a learning environment. And so Thursdays were learning days. And every member of staff, however junior, took it in turns to teach the rest of the group something. So they'd go and research things. They'd teach each other the skills. And they then started to work in teams. And they were always having very complex things to do. And so instead of everybody doing a little bit of it, they'd get together and say, right, how are we going to manage this? And so their job satisfaction went up, the quality of work went up, the quantity of work went up, and the quality of their life and their relationships improved. Now, once people start to see results, then they will do more, won't they? But often there is a resistance because people like to stay in their comfort zone. I think it ought to be called their familiarity zone because it's often uncomfortable. But you've got to look for the quick wins. And that's why when I came in, I looked, where can they create quick wins that will improve the quality of their experience? And that was actually initially focusing on the dentists.
And that takes us back to that first feedback meeting where we asked the question, what do you think would make a difference in the way we do things? It was very painful for the leader. I'm curious, in your private one-on-one with that leader afterwards, after that particular meeting, was there an aha moment like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they said all that and it's on me, I need to change? Was it instantaneous for the leader, or did they start to see and then believe?
I think probably a bit of both. We'd had a lot of discussion before the meeting. He didn't go into that meeting cold. And I'd had a conversation with each member of staff individually. I knew pretty well a number of things that were going to come up. So I had been able to say to him, don't be surprised. And I'd seen it myself. And so I said, they're going to confirm the things I've been saying to you, and there's going to be new stuff there. But instead of seeing this as a negative, I want you to see that this is an opportunity. You now have a choice. Everything we do is a choice. Even not choosing actively is a choice. And it's often when we let things drift that the most far-reaching consequences, because every choice has a consequence, the most far-reaching and negative consequences often come when we just allow things to drift. And I think that before that meeting, I'd been saying to him, you keep saying you want better staff, but actually, if you carry on doing what you're doing, it doesn't matter how good your staff are, you're the person that's actually getting in the way of developing them. If you choose to develop them, yes, there may still be staff that in 4 months' time you decide they're not for you, but at least you'll know that they're not for you for the right reason and not simply because you're not managing them properly.
And that's a tough pill to swallow for so many leaders. But what you're describing is such an important function that you, as a teacher, a coach, a leader yourself, it's such an important function. This is so prevalent all over the United States as well as in the UK, that the values are on the wall, behind the reception area, and in email signatures. And are they coming to life? Are people living them? Are the behaviors, are they congruent? I don't think so in many cases. So I'm glad to hear that there's an expert like you who can teach people this.
Just a small example. I was working in a manufacturing firm. They manufacture wood floors. And the boss, and we'd been working, for a very short time. I was complaining that his staff were not compliant, wearing safety goggles and safety shoes. And I said, well, do realise that in the UK, if there is an accident, you're culpable, not them. He said, well, I've told them. I said, you've told them, but you've not actually done anything about it. Moreover, I've noticed that you walk across the shop floor and you've not got steel-capped shoes on. And so you're not giving them a great example. And so it's you tell them, but there's no. It's a bit like parents. Go and tidy your room. Then no consequences. For every choice, there has to be consequences. And so we told the staff that from next Monday, you've got a week. If you don't bring your steel-capped shoes and you're not wearing them, you'll be sent home to get them and your pay will be docked. Very simple. One person forgot them on Monday. Nobody ever forgot them again. Very, very clear. But also the managing director and his directors recognized that they had to have the same practice when they were walking across the manufacturing floor. You have to walk your talk, model what you want, and follow through. And in many ways, being a leader of a team or a company, whether that's small or big, is a bit like being a parent. If you just nag your children, it becomes white noise. There has to be consequences. If you're good, this happens. If you're not, this happens.
So many great lessons you've shared today so far, Gina, and I honor you for that. It sounds so simple. It might be the best kept secret hiding in plain sight. To bring your values to life, to live your values, you have to decide, make a conscious decision of A, what they are, B, what the behaviors are that match living to that standard. And as a leader, you got to walk the walk. I love everything you shared. I'm curious if someone out there hears this and it resonates, because I'm sure there are a lot of leaders out there that can hear this exact story, the 3 examples you shared in the last few minutes, and it really connects. How would someone go about reaching out to you or finding out more about your practice and how they may take advantage of some of the leadership development that you offer?
Best thing to do is probably email me at Gina, Gina, at genuinely-u.com. That's Gina at genuinely-u.com.
Okay. We'll have that in the show notes for everyone. Where else can we find out about you and any social media handles or anything else? Because you said before that you didn't really do social media, but I know now that I think you do now. So how can we find you?
You can come to Genuinely You on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd be grateful if your listeners would subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is Genuinely You with Gina Gardiner. There's about 650 videos on there with all sorts of things on there to help. Go and look on my Amazon page. You'll find books. More recently, I've been creating intentional journals and workbooks. So instead of giving people a great big book, and there are plenty of conventional books there as well, there's a particular theme, and then there's a 30-day workbook for people to actually start to embed that theme. Because I know people are short of time. So there's a lot of leadership books there, but there are also themes around health. If people are interested in my story and the principles that I use, then Thriving, Not Surviving, the 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success and Fulfillment, shares a bit of my story and the principles. Interesting, those 5 pathways, doesn't matter whether it's a life coaching client or a business client, we end up going through those 5 pathways, which are around beliefs, relationships, the approach to success, managing change and transitions, and then fulfillment and purpose. And those are, I would say, the 5 pathways that everybody needs to be aware of and to work on, doing that deep dive internal work. And so there's a lot of resources there for self-help. If you go to GinaGardinerAssociates.co.uk or Enlighten and ProfitableLeaders.com, those are their training platforms. If you want to look at the personal stuff, then go to Genuinely You. There's a relationship bridge program there. There is a spiritual and personal program, Thriving, that you can do. If you're stressed, then the personal empowerment plan. That's a 26-week program where you get a pep talk, a personal empowerment program, a little video, 5 minutes on a Sunday night of a strategy for you to use to manage your life more effectively without stress. We can't eradicate stress, but there are so many things we can do. So just one little example. One of those is the mountain molehill test. So when things happen, it tends to be at the end of the world. It's a big thing. It's a mountain.
Yes.
So ask yourself, okay, tomorrow, will it still be a mountain or will it have become a molehill? What about next week? Will it be a molehill next week? What about the end of the year? What about in 5 years? What about the end of your life? And I would say 99.999 reoccurring, at some point on that timeline, it will be reduced from a mountain to a molehill. Well, if you're going to reduce it in a week, a month, 5 years, why don't you reduce it now to a molehill and actually put it into perspective and save yourself a lot of heartache?
Wow. If you're going to reduce it in a week, a month, a year, 5 years, why not reduce it now and save yourself the headache, the heartache? Love it. Yeah, this is amazing. And
that's just one example. There's 26 different ones, and some will suit some people, some will suit others.
I love the idea of journaling.
But I would say
I'd love to go back for a second. You mentioned
journaling's
that.
a really
I love it. What's an example of one of your journals that we might find at your Amazon page? Because I love the idea of getting a journal, and I think that might be the giveaway or something that we might order a few of those to give some of our listeners. What's an example of one of the journals, Gina?
So there is a series of leadership books, which is Emerging Enlightened Leadership, Authentic Enlightened Leadership, Limitless Enlightened Leadership. I'm just trying to think what the other one is now. Profitable Enlightened Leadership, I think. But they come as a whole series. If you are an empath, there's a whole series of books for empaths. If you're facing illness, then there are 2 books. So one is Take Responsibility for Your Life. Now that was created by myself and a friend who was living with cancer. In terms of don't just leave it to the doctors. Not against doctors, but you have to take radical responsibility for your own health. And then the other one is for people living with long-term illness, including long COVID and disability. And that's a book, but it also there's a whole playlist of videos on YouTube that go with the book. So you buy the book and look at the videos and they work together. The videos are free. And the books are very cheap, $10, all of them.
Well, this has been a really amazing journey you've taken us on so far today, Gina, and I really appreciate it. I would love to invite you into our wrap-up section, which is ding, 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 the lightning round of questions, of which I have 3 questions to wrap things up. First, I'd love to ask you, when you hear the title of our show, The Eternal Optimist podcast. What does eternal optimist or eternal optimism, what does that mean to you, Gina?
It means that you look for the opportunities, that instead of looking for all the things that go wrong, that you actually look for what you can do rather than what you can't. Have I got time to share a little story?
Absolutely.
So in 2005-06, I became a master practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming. And I wanted to go and see as many people doing it as possible. And I ended up at the Excel Centre in London on Unleash the Power Within with Tony Robbins. I have to say I was quite cynical when I went, big American, very loud. I thought, it's going to be all hype. How wrong could you be? In the morning, he was talking about a course in California, and I really fancied it. But even though I'd traveled the country working, I'd run my school from a wheelchair, I didn't have, at that time, an electric travel chair. And I thought, I won't be able to do that. And I dismissed it. And, the thing being that when I travelled around the country, I used the same taxi driver. He would take me to where I was going, wait for me, bring me back. So I just dismissed it out of hand. That evening, I did the fire walk. Now, I could walk a few steps with help at that time, and I was absolutely chuffed to little mint balls that I had managed to walk the fire walk. But as I sat down in my wheelchair, the guy behind me was a double amputee. He tipped himself up onto his hands, and he walked the hot coals on his hands. And in that moment, I realised that I was self-limiting. And so that night I booked my flight and I booked my ticket to the course. I did all of Tony Robbins' courses, became a senior leader. I travelled the world, and I am eternally grateful to this guy. I have no idea who he is. And I've shared this story because for me, he helped me recognise that I was limiting. And for me, part of eternal optimism is to look at what you can do rather than what you can't. And we all self-limit. So my challenge to your listeners is, how are you self-limiting at the moment? And how can you use that optimism to expand your horizons?
Wow. That was definitely worth the time to hear that story, Gina. Thank you. That was amazing. Next
pleasure.
question. I'd love to go to, is there any particular, let's just say a song or a movie, maybe a song and a movie that might inspire you, give you energy? What might be a song and a movie for you?
Goodness me. Got terrible memory for names.
You're welcome to sing
Certainly
it,
movies,
by the way.
No, thank you. I think something like Erin Brockovich, looking at somebody where all of the odds were against her. There wasn't a song in the movie, but certainly the movie, how being persistent and knowing what was right, her level of integrity about it when the big boys were all fighting dirty, and that she was going to get on and she was going to do it. For me, watching that, I think, is something that's so inspiring.
I hit the nail on the head there. I love that movie. I remember that one. Well, I'd say last question here. If there are one or two books that you'd recommend that have had an impact in your world, outside of your own collection, your own library of books you've written, if there are any other books out there, one or two that may have impacted you, what are they?
One would be Johann Hari's Lost Connection, which talks about depression. Not that I suffer from depression, but what an amazing book around how we deal with depression in entirely the wrong way and looking at the causes of depression. So that had a profound effect. And I suppose for me, The Eighth Habit by Stephen Covey, the 7 habits were amazing, but the 8th habit is something that resonated so much with how I was operating and how I believe we should operate. And so that's something that shaped me. The Seventh Habit, which I read many, many years ago, and then the Eighth Habit when it first came out. And it wasn't that it was teaching me to do something different. What it did is it really confirmed for me what I had been doing.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, Gina, it's been amazing having you on the show today. I thank you so much. Our listeners, thank you so much. And you've enlightened us. You've given us so much information. You've given us so many heartfelt stories. And I believe that anyone who's listening to this is going to be a Gina Gardiner fan. And you can see in the show notes, friends, where to go and check out Gina and see the number of places. The number one place I'd encourage you to check out Gina, I think she said, go to her YouTube channel. And in that YouTube channel, I believe it's Genuinely You with Gina Gardiner. Check it out. 650 videos in there, and get to know this wonderful woman, Gina Gardiner. By the way, before we recorded this, when Gina and I first met like a week or two ago, she was in the middle of an amazing humanitarian effort. Can you share with the listeners, to wrap things up, what were you doing in the last week or two, Gina, to help out in the world? Love to hear a quick bite of that story, please.
I have a Ukrainian refugee staying with me through the UK scheme. And before the war, she worked with a charity that supports mainly orphans. Many of them are disabled, but they're also now supporting families that have been bombed out. And so she was feeling that she was not able to do anything. So I said, well, why don't we do a charity event? So last Saturday, we did an in-person charity event. It was a lot of hard work. I realized the last time I ran it, I was at school and I had 100 staff and 500 kids to delegate to and carry and so on. So we did really well. And we've now still got an online giving. I'd love it if your listeners would help. It's justgiving.com/crowdfunding/mom, MOM, plus PLUS, me, ME. So justgiving.com/crowdfunding/mom plus me. And it would be great, even if you can spare just a few dollars.
Mm-hmm. And that's mom plus PLUS, or is it the plus sign?
No, it's the word plus me.
The word plus.
And just one thing that they've been doing, 100-place orphanage. There is no electricity because the infrastructure's been bombed out. Many of those children in wheelchairs. No heating, no lighting, no hot food. And so the charity provided them with warm clothing, and they set up a field kitchen so that they at least get one hot meal a day. So I've got pictures of the children out in the snow being fed from the field kitchen. So I know there are so many calls upon people's purse, but just a few dollars would make such a difference.
Yeah, it goes such a long way, just even a few dollars. And we'll have this in the show notes as well, justgiving.com/crowdfunding/mom plus me. To help out Ukrainian orphans, many in wheelchairs, disabled, to have food and warmth. So thank you, Gina, again for everything. And friends out there listening, this is the caliber of human being that is helping to lead this revolution of hope and inspire strong leadership. So please reach out to Gina. Please check out her work. And if you're looking in your company, to make some shifts and to live a more valued-centered, heart-centered leadership style for the people, then definitely contact Gina Gardiner. So Gina, thank you so much for being here today. We love you and we really appreciate you. Thank you.